you? Hello. Can't stay away. Director Mahoney. That was me honking at you at the intersection the other day when you were walking your dog. I don't know if you caught that. Yes, I'm sure. I know. Same. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I take all the tools. You want to make me see better? Give me it. Give it to me. All of it. Yeah, I'll take it all. I don't think I'm going to stay for this housing plan. Postcards for school boarding.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Let's convene the meeting of the Finance Committee for Monday, October 27, 2025. In advance, please excuse my voice, but know that this is about 300% better than it was Friday, so can you imagine? It pays to have a fourth grader who brings home bugs from school. So let's start by considering the minutes, the meeting minutes from the Finance Committee's July 21st, 2025 Finance Committee hearing. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. We've got 3 other items tonight. The one that I think we should focus on is our council budget priorities, most of all. But before doing that, I'd like to briefly turn to item number, items number 3 and 4, my communication regarding property tax matters. And Director Mahoney shared some materials that I'd like to give her the opportunity to at least address, and perhaps the committee might make a motion to accept into the record of our meeting so that they can appear in the meeting minutes. Director Mahoney's explanation of property taxes. I sent around the copies of this to all council members before the earlier today. So I hope council members have received that and can take a look. But Director Mahoney, would you like to briefly outline what you shared and your purpose in sharing that explainer? Sure. And can we display anything on this committee screen? If we can, I'll share, or we'll get this document shared. Thank you. But go ahead, Director Mahoney.
Sure. Yeah. I understand property taxes are confusing. They're confusing to myself as well as everybody else. And so I had put this together years ago, and I just updated it for the city of Lakewood information. It's just good to know where your property tax is, how it breaks out, what the allocation is, and a little bit about how it's calculated. So the front part of it talks about the allocation, where you can see the schools receive 52.55% of your property tax payments, and the city 24.35%. The rest, county, Metro Parks, Tri-C, and the Port Authority. And then I have an explanation about homestead exemption, and that's who is eligible to apply for that, and the stipulations on that. One thing I would like to say about homestead exemption on the second page. So there are 3 different discounts, if you want to say that, to a person's property tax. One is the homestead exemption that you have to apply for. The other is the 10% rollback and the 2.5% rollback. All 3 of those reductions are repaid to the city by the state. So the city isn't out that money per se. The state reimburses us. And if you see the homestead exemption reimbursement in 2025 from the state was just over $276,000. I did a rough calculation, and I believe it's about 440 households in the city of Lakewood have the homestead exemption. I wonder if there aren't many more eligible for it that do not, have not applied and have not received it. The main thing is for that homestead exemption is you have to be the owner of the owner occupied of the property. So I would ask council in your travels if you know someone, especially if they're over 65 and they are a lower income household, to go ahead. I would encourage them to apply for that homestead exemption. I'm not sure if many more are eligible that haven't applied, or if 440 is a good number for the city. So then on the second page, it goes through all the millage that the city assesses, which is 17.4 mills. And then you can see in 2025, we received just over $27 million in property tax. The important thing to point out on that is how important property tax is to the city. You can imagine, especially the current conversations about inside millage, that's that almost just over $5 million goes towards our bond retirement. And if we did not receive that, it would be detrimental to the city.
Pardon me, I want to say, Danielle, are you able to scroll down? If and when you can, that'd be great, but if not, we'll refer to it. Go ahead, Director Mahoney.
That's okay. And then just below that, it talks about the inside millage. And again, that's been the conversation down in Columbus, whether they're going to mess with our inside millage or not. And you can see where it goes, some to the county, the metro parks, the schools, and the city. And then the other millage is charter millage, and those in that middle of the second page, those have all been voted on from the residents of Lakewood. It was back, and I didn't put this on here, but it was back in the 50s. Most of those charter millages were approved. And then the last page just goes through a calculation of how you calculate your property taxes on, I used a $100,000 market value home, and this is the very complicated math that goes into figuring out what the actual property tax assessment is. So, and you see you take 35% of the market value, multiply it by the millage, and then there's those reductions for House Bill 920, which was put in place in 1976 to, it goes towards the school levies only, and it was a way to stem the very large increase at that time in property values, and that's been used ever since the 1976 bill passed. And then if there's reduction, if it's owner-occupied and non-business. So an easier way, if you're a homeowner that lives in your own home, you can take the market value, multiply it by, for the city of Lakewood, it's 2.25%, and that gives you a rough idea of, pretty close idea of what your property taxes would be for that home.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple follow-up questions, but members of the committee and members of council, any questions you'd like to ask? Sure. Or Ms. Strebick.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Mahoney. This was very helpful, and I did have a chance to look at that information that Mr. Bullock sent over today. With the homestead exemption, you have to apply for that one specifically. The other two, the 10% and the 2.5, I think, were the other exemptions. Do you have to apply for those as well? Or those are automatic?
They are, I believe they are automatic. I have to look up.
Yeah, I would like to understand that a little bit more. And then it seems to me, when we're talking about, you know, the eligible folks for this, that maybe the Lakewood Community Service Center might be an avenue to get out the word. I'm trying to think exactly what you're saying is, who are we missing here? You know, probably not people that I'm running in circles with, but maybe some other folks that are looking for assistance some other way, that maybe that there's a bridge that we can build between those. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Any responses, Director Mahoney?
No, that's okay.
Okay. Other council members?
Them.
Mr. Evans?
I would just add that if we're looking for folks to advocate for trying to get people to apply for and be eligible for programs that are available, Lakewood Alive would be another good avenue for that.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
Thank you. This chart is really helpful. And as property taxes, even with this helpful guide, are still challenging to fully understand. So the 920 reduction, for those of you that are uninitiated, House Bill 920 was passed sometime in the 80s or 90s, I believe, and it basically kept levy amounts at the original so you froze the value in time when you passed the levy. And that mostly affects schools and metro parks, for example. how does 920 affect us? Because this is charter millage.
It does not.
It does not.
920 does not affect the city.
Okay. So all of our 17.4 mills fluctuate with valuation citywide.
Yes, it goes directly. If your value of your home increases, the city will receive more money.
Okay, so like, and so for folks, and then this is what's so complicated about it is, and I think Director Mahoney did a good job of explaining it, but it's that, so if you look back up at the property tax allocation, that changes every year really, right? Somewhat.
Really every 3 years, but yes.
Yeah, slightly every 3 years and then potentially drastically every 6 years when they do their reappraisal, because our percentage is, you know, our mills are, that's 17.4, so we get, would that be 1.74% of
Of the property valuation,
for Lakewood?
thanks, yes.
Yeah. Whereas the schools, it could, when they hit their levy, it could have been 4% of the valuation, but valuations could have gone up. And so technically the school's levy is now 3.7% of the valuation or whatever, because the schools will only get that set amount of money. But that's complicated by the fact that some levies have inside and outside millage.
Right, and a bond levy for the school might not be affected. I don't believe they are. If it's a debt valued levy, it's not affected by 920. I believe that's true.
And then further complicating that, you know, this effort to abolish property taxes could potentially expose every government entity that has debt to bondholder claims,
That's right.
including the state, which ultimately, if the city of Lakewood, and this is perhaps for Director Vargo, the city of Lakewood were to default on its debt, I believe the state would then be obligated to figure out that debt. So it's interesting to me that the state could authorize something that could then create a giant liability for the state if all these bondholders, you know, people that lent money for, we sold bonds for our sewers, we sold bonds for our water, we sold bonds for public improvements, school sells bonds for construction of facilities, and then those banks that hold those bonds, there's no longer a revenue source to supply those bonds with bond payments. And so what happens? Which further illustrates how absurd it is, because it would create just cascading liabilities for the state. But I am interested in and this is very helpful to kind of help us as we go into our budget season understand that source of revenue, because do we have any indications? It looks like we collected 27 million this year. Obviously, within that, you know, general fund is, so 13.5 million is going just towards our operations. Do we have any indication of the trend over 10 years of property tax collections, roughly?
Do you mean the percentage of how much we collect, or?
No, like we collected 27 million this year. How much we collected in?
About 6 million more after the latest reappraisal.
So the 6-year appraisal gave us about 6 million more in that valuation. And then 6 years before that, I'm assuming that 2013 was worse than 2019.
Yeah, we do have, I could share that trends of the property tax.
That'd be really helpful, just because I think we get questions about it, you know, as council people.
Yep.
But yeah, this is very interesting, and you know, I think it's a hot topic that all of us need to be informed on because of the issues associated with them. Plain Dealer's running a lot of really good stories about it. Their reporting is actually pretty good, but it would be catastrophic if this revenue source went away for the city. Not only would we likely default on some of our pension obligations, we'd probably default on our bond obligations, our bank obligations, and then have way less money to just pay staff.
Right. Yeah.
I think we were nibbling around that point, but I wanted to make it abundantly clear as we went over these documents.
Yeah, and from what I understand, I attended a Zoom, was it last Friday? So far, it seems that they are focusing on the schools more than city property tax cuts. cut. So far, we're okay, but to be determined. Every day, I think I see another bill come out trying to do something.
Any other discussion? Councilmembers, I'm going to ask a question or two. So on Director Mahoney, on the point you made is a good one, that seems that you're wondering or anticipating that there could be Lakewood residents who are eligible but have not yet applied to the homestead exemption. Can we, in the tax department, do an evaluation? We have some private tax information that no other department, I think, can share, but could we initiate a mailing to certain segments saying, hey, you may be eligible, you may want to apply, and then refer those residents to either our city or to a Lakewood Alive or a LCSC, and then at least avail ourselves of resources that are already available on the books and may be underutilized. And to your point, the state reimburses the city for those dollars. And on the chart you provided, I was surprised at how small that amount was. $276,000 this year is the value of all homestead exemptions in the city. Now, that might be, there might be some arithmetic around that because those homes are valued at certain rates, or we're only talking about a portion. And it does seem to me as if the state defined criteria for eligibility and the amount are both pretty small. You have to make 40,000 or less. That's pretty small or
Right.
low. And then it gives you, I'm looking for the amount. It says what percentage you get off. You get 28,000 off of your home. So God only knows how that calculates in the algorithm to,
Yeah, I think I calculated about $870 a year savings. That's where I took 870, that 276,000 divided by 870. That's where I,
So maybe $75 a month, but we'll take it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can help a Lakewood resident, great, we should. So that might be a way to do something.
And the city gets made whole by the state, which is an important thing I don't think I knew before this. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So, and that's part of the tone and tenor of the conversation that we had at the full council meeting. We'll bring this to a wrap shortly because we got to get to other stuff. And we think we want to be thoughtful, but I appreciate the beginning of this discussion and the points that are being made by the finance department and Mr. Baker and others. The state is mostly in the driver's seat, but I guess it's my thesis that we should be an active participant in those conversations. Heavens only knows if it'll do any good, right? Because the state doesn't always listen to local government partners. But I don't think we should be passive in this, and there could be tools and options to facilitate the city in making targeted relief. And I think what the neighbors who are saying that they want to abolish all property taxes are saying is, listen to us, record scratch. Everybody's ignoring us, and it's becoming unaffordable, so we're willing to blow everything up. And I think Councilman Baker's point is that it's right on the keystone of financial stability for all kinds of stuff, so it would really blow things up, which is not what anybody wants. Because I don't even think the tax advocates want their schools to close, their fire and police to be laid off. That erodes your property value and your quality of life too. But I think it's a basically desperate cry for help. And I will say, I've been door knocking and people are telling me, and they're not all just conservative ideological activists. They are artists, they're artisan local business owners who are doing very creative businesses, and they bought a home 10 years ago at a certain price, and now they're getting squeezed, and they wonder if they can afford to pay for their business and pay for their personal home. So this is not ALEC or Heritage Foundation. I think this is people who are of modest income feeling the squeeze. So I would invite us to respect what we're hearing and not just pigeonhole it into, hey, this is an ideological attack and our job is to defend at all costs. I do appreciate that, Director Mahoney, your job is to make sure we have the resources and that we're functional and we can meet our needs and our financial obligation. That's vitally important. So I appreciate all of that as well. So there's some balance here, I think, and it is insightful to me that all of the city's millage does float with inflation. That is not the case for the schools, as Mr. Baker was trying to say. Most of their receipts are capped, not all, but most. So, so there's a couple of things to be thoughtful here. And I also note that the county is half of the city's property tax receipt. The library is very modest. In fact, Lakewood Public Library is the least expensive library system in the whole county. That's a credit to the library and the Library Foundation. The Metro Parks is very modest and delivers a very, very high level of service. Cuyahoga Community College is an important institution. The Port Authority is almost not there. So the other entities that receive property taxes are quite a modest amount. So I am not making the argument that property taxes aren't legitimate at all. I'm just trying to understand what the trends are, because I think a one-time 6-year, nearly, well, in some cases doubling of the home valuation has made it difficult for people's family incomes to absorb and amortize that spike in their property tax costs. And we're also seeing that when a new landlord purchases a very expensive property compared to what it was 6 years ago, they're then passing those costs along in rent increases because they have to amortize the new, used to cost $220,000, now they bought it for $425,000. And that's being passed on in rents. So this peculiarity of property values and the property tax associated with is having a real effect on the people all over Cuyahoga County and including Lakewood. And I don't know what we do about that, but I wanted to begin understanding it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, candidly, and I think you've described it well, and I have heard the same things you've heard. So my point was more about the abolishment, not that it's not an issue, but just that the abolishment is not a solution, I guess.
Agreed, and you make a great point, because if you detonate a bomb at the right point in the dam, the whole thing collapses, and this would do exactly that, because we couldn't pay our road obligation debt and our sewer debt and our police and fire pension. We maintain those things. I totally agree.
Yeah, but so I think as a body and as a city, there are two things we can do. One is advocate to the state. A lot of these things, as Representative Glassburn and Bride Rose Sweeney let us know, or these, this homestead exemption and the credit for living in your home, the state makes those local governments full for those payments, and there used to be more. And so the state has slowly capped those shared local burdens with local communities. And so advocate, that's what we can do, or there are targeted subsidies that we could consider in our budget, right? And what I mean by that is that, $40,000 is a low amount of money for the homestead exemption. We could supercharge the homestead exemption. Now, I think administratively that does create issues, because technically it doesn't get paid to us, it gets paid to the county. So I think that I'd have to understand, the property tax kind of relief that I've seen has been county-wide. Summit County did some interesting things. Cuyahoga County may consider some interesting things. It's harder for municipalities to do that because we're not the fiscal agent that collects the money. So, but all ears if there are municipalities that are doing that.
That's all very thoughtful, thank you. And just so council members know, the state budget that passed for the 2-year biennium this past June 30 included a flat tax, which means that the waitress who earns tips and might be able to afford a new affordable rental unit in the Lakewood Hospital redevelopment pays the same income tax rate as a billionaire. So that's the priority of the state, and that's part of why more and more pressure has been on the shoulders of property taxes. So you've got a working class senior citizen who has owned her home for 10 years and paid the mortgage for 30 years and now is feeling the financial squeeze, and that's not right. So, okay, thank you for the discussion there. That was longer than I anticipated. Could we make a motion to include Director Mahoney's a memo explaining the calculation of property taxes into the committee's record?
Second. Or I'll move.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Second, let's go to the communication from President Keppel regarding council budget priorities, and also an accompanying spreadsheet that I shared from Director Mahoney, which is administration's initial response or baseline for explaining or addressing what to date is included in the informal pending draft budget by the administration for 2026. The administration hasn't yet formally introduced that, is preparing that, but that's coming soon. We think, Director Mahoney, not November 3, but November 17 probably. Okay, so that's coming, but the administration's been working since, Director Mahoney, do you start in August, July 4, Memorial Day?
August.
August, okay. So the budget process on the administration side is pretty extensive, and you go department by department, office by office, correct? And so you go in a lot more detail than even what we see in the comprehensive budget document, the budget binder, which is not itself a law, it's an explanatory report. We'll review that when we have it soon, along with the formal 12 or 13. How many appropriations ordinances do we have? Our budget ordinances in total?
About that.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
A lot.
But what we've traditionally are, now we could do this differently, but the tradition in Lakewood has been to have these different appropriation pieces of legislation, and it includes a macro number for various different categories. Back in the before times, probably after the 50s when the charter votes were taken on the tax levies, but before 1981, which was our last income tax increase, which is a long time, the city broke out different categories of what the appropriation ordinances have to say. And so we've been doing that ever since I've been around. But that doesn't provide a lot of detail, all right? So we want to get into some of the details, because what City Council would like to do, as we've been doing for some time, is develop some consensus around some budget priorities, and then see that they are expressed in the budget, funded in the budget in various ways. We know what those budget priorities are because we've been working on them for about 12 months in our various council budget retreats, and that is what's in front of us in Council President Keppel's letter in front of us, which is on the docket tonight, and I'm calling it up. And maybe Danielle or whomever can display it on the screen as well. Thank you. So we see on page 2 of the communication, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 different items mentioned with differing tiers of support from council members. So my hope tonight is to convene a discussion where we, council members, talk internally to ourselves to set some expectations for our own process, our own selves, but also to do the same thing in dialogue with the administration. And then third, to identify where, if anywhere, City Council has more work we would like to do to propose something in specific if we want to enhance what's in the administration's budget or gap fill where it's not in the administration's budget. So, pause with that. I'll pause there. Any questions so far? Okay, and we're council members. Can you have on your own screens? You've got a copy of our list. So briefly, it's affordable housing strategy, block/community clubs, Madison Park master plan says farmers market, connectivity meaning Wi-Fi and things like fiber, racial equity plan, public education, communication and connection, the wastewater treatment plan, short-term interventions for complete streets in the case board, general operations. I think we need more detail there. City Hall space / police women's locker room space, active transportation SS4A plan, ADA transition plan, public art, community health needs assessment action plan, large tree preservation / tree advisory and education, and climate action plan, an initiative under that for composting. And we have members of the public here to speak on that item. We'll be sure to get you, not just yet, Mr. Later, but soon. So I said all that because we can't display it on screen, but that's what we're talking about. And then maybe Director Mahoney, if everybody's got the spreadsheet the director shared, please call that up now. And maybe we could go through what you've presented, Director Mahoney, as in many places in the budget or in the budget partly, and in some places you're asking for additional information. Would you like to proceed through the list?
Sure. The affordable housing strategy, there was a housing study completed, and thanks to Director Byington, she showed me it's on the website under community development. I'm not sure if council had something extra that they were thinking about with that, but there was a study completed. The block/community clubs, we have budgeted an additional money under council's budget for things, I guess, for things like that. And also additional for postage, if that was council's intent, for more communication through the block clubs. The Madison Park Master Plan / Farmers Market, we do have the futsal improvements, the Beck's Pool design are in the budget that will be presented to council in a few weeks. The Farmers Market, we have been paying for, and it is included again in the 26 budget. The connectivity in the parks / smart locks. The major parks do have Wi-Fi. I have from the IT department, it's well over $250,000 to just run the fiber. That doesn't even include any boxes they need or anything like that in these smaller parks. And I talked to Director Gordon. They are still researching the best solution for the smart locks in the restrooms. But again, that was included in the budget. For the racial equity plan, we did pay $32,000 to the Equius group back in 2024. I'm not quite sure where that stood after that. I personally, I haven't seen a report, but there might be one somewhere. Public education, communication connection, again, that reflects up in the additional money appropriated under the council's budget. The IWIP, sewer projects 052, 59, Bunce Road, 2025 water main program, continuing engineering on the IWIP, and overflow monitoring. So quite a bit of the capital plan includes things related to the IWIP. In the complete streets and case, included in the capital plan is striping, speed traffic calming, pedestrian program, and then out in the future, there is shared use path on West Clifton in 2028, and then Clifton Boulevard in 2029. I'm not quite sure where council was going on the general operations line item. The City Hall space / policewoman space, there's $18 million included in the capital budget for City Hall renovations and modernization. ADA transportation, there's PCR and ADA curb ramp assessment, which is, that's done every 4 years. That is included in the 2026 budget. And there is also ADA improvements included in the capital plan. Public art, we have historically done $50,000 in the capital plan. There's an additional $42,500 allocated from CDBG funds for 2026. And lastly, the items that, the large tree preservation policy, there's a reforestation program of $175,000. We have increased the Arbor Day giveaway in the last couple years, and the hazardous tree and stump grinding, there's $185,000 allocated for that. And that's all I know.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of information. Okay, council members, what I guess I'm taking notes. I will volunteer to be the clerk, even though we have a real clerk over at this desk, of this process for council, and create a living spreadsheet document and use it as a working tracker that can be used officially as a public document on the record. And so what I've done on my version of this, which I'll share, is add columns that say, okay, so we've got the priority, the administration's response, a new column that says council initiative, where we would define what it is that we mean, because the director has in a couple of spaces, on a couple of these list items, correctly said, I need more information or more specifics. Then we would add the funding difference such that it exists. For example, if we think that the IWIP plan is already fully funded, that funding difference might be 0. But if we're saying that we want to allocate more funds for public art, we might say exactly how many more, what is that difference? So we would at least know what we're proposing. And then we'll also have, at a future step, what is the funding source? Because as Director Mahoney and I have had a chance to talk by phone, and the mayor alluded in our public meeting last time, the administration is proposing expenditures in balance with revenues, and then is going to report a balanced budget with certain reserve allocations. And we have a number of them. We have a rainy day fund, we have a 27th day pay period, we have an economic development reserve, we have, I think, our cash reserve for X number of days. At some points it's been 60, at some points it's been other numbers. But those are defined financial policies, if I recall correctly. And so in the budget that you're going to propose, you'll say, here's our proposed reserves. So we do have some financial reserves that we could, that are available to spend, but as a matter of policy, the city has said for fiscal management and responsibility, we don't go beyond certain thresholds. Although I will say that that has fluctuated from year to year by different mayors, different finance directors, and responding to different circumstances over the years. But I certainly welcome the point that is being made, which is we've got a fiscal discipline responsibility here as well. Now, I also did just hear that the income tax receipts and the property tax receipts have been on the rise in recent years too. So we may have more financial capacity.
Unfortunately, so are the expenditures.
Or the expenditures, but not 26%. Our expenditures don't rise by 26%, do they?
Well, our current budget, we're at about a $17,000 structural balance, so it's a pretty tight budget still. Revenues versus expenses.
I would like to know how, because I don't think inflation in the general economy, or even in our wages or our materials, has gone up that drastically. So that's for another conversation. And I also, are we anticipating bargaining unit presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to provide this feedback. It is helpful to the city council to know earlier than now what are, and this is probably an executive session, but what are financial goals for that? What are personnel goals for that? What are HR parameters for that? And as the city negotiating team goes in and commits to certain negotiating parameters, that city council has eyes on what those things are. And I'm going to guess that it's already late in the hour to have that conversation. But if the administration is presuming that city council is going to agree to increases in the wages, then what the budget that you're presenting to us is going to assume a bunch of things, that we're agreeing to increase expenditures in wages before we've even understood what the negotiations are, what the goals of the negotiations are, and things like we're hearing from residents that they're feeling the sting of property taxes. So, like, I think that for us to budget effectively, we've got to communicate about these core issues a lot earlier in the process. And so if we're looking for $25,000 or $100,000 more to spend on some vitally important issues, I'm not convinced that we don't have more than $17,000 in our structural balance. See what I mean? There's a lot of arithmetic that's gone into the
That
statement.
also includes capital expenditures and things
Right.
like that, so.
And let me pivot to that before I turn it over to some colleagues, because I want to ask them for some feedback. But in the City Hall space, police women's space, I don't think City Council's priority was to redo all of City Hall. It was to, now, admittedly, we owe you some communication on this point, but the administration's response is included in the capital budget is $18 million for City Hall modernization. That's the price tag for redoing all of City Hall, if I recall. Is that for budget year 2026, or is that for budget year 5 years in the future?
That is for 2026. That is not the total cost for renovating the current space and new City Hall.
Okay, so the administration intends to present us a budget to redo the existing City Hall and acquire new City Hall all next year.
Partial of this City Hall and the new City
Okay,
Hall.
so that's a big statement, and that's a big price also. So, and I think that's a live conversation that City Council has not established as an agreed upon method or strategy. I know we have a working group that's doing some good work to work through that and try to come to some mutual ground with the administration. And I think, I mean, I understand the administration's point of view is we're going to propose our view of what the solution is, and so that's probably what you're bringing to the table. But if we're saying that we only have a $17,000 structural deficit, even after we've received record income tax increases and record property tax increases, it might be because we've got an $18 million expense included, and we've got to talk about those things. And I also put on the table, you know, last time we had some back and forth about a pier, fishing pier at Lakewood Park. There's some big ticket capital items that I think we need to have a direct conversation about before we assume that City Council understands what the administration is prioritizing, agrees that it's a priority, and agrees that it's a priority for 2026 rather than a future year or maybe at all. So I welcome your feedback on how we can have those conversations in an effective manner. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but it's not actually sidetracked at all, because if we're trying to find a modest amount of additional money for City Council priorities, and we're going to have to ask and answer where are we going to fund these things, it gets us into this territory of what are we prioritizing. Let me hit pause and see if I can. Other council members, I want to ask you some questions about your priorities, but Mr. Baker, then Mr. Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I will say, you know, appreciate this back and forth and look forward to the budget process. And, you know, I've always, as I've been on council for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, like council priorities versus, like, council priorities is the budget we pass because we are the appropriating entity for the city. And so, you know, sometimes we've used that aggressively and sometimes we haven't. And I think that ultimately we want to see the city be successful. The administration is the one who is in City Hall every day, knows the streets, got to rely on your directors. And so the process is really good, but at the end of the day, we appropriate, and that's our job. That's what the charter tells us to do. As we go through some of these things in this budget priority, and I appreciate the administration's response, you know, some of it is, you know, I think what we talked about, and perhaps this wasn't clear just from like a line item on a sheet, but like, you know, for example, the block clubs. You know, when you're a person and you're trying to get your block club together, it's a little bit hard. You know, you do your best to coordinate with Public Works and the street department, but it's kind of like, here's your permit. And that's what Public Works does. So the question was, is there any way to like create additional staff capacity for a toolkit for working with Lakewood Alive? Lakewood Alive, I think, is trying to enter the space as well. And if you're saying that we should hire city council staff to do it, then maybe we should, right? I think that's a really good suggestion. And perhaps, you know, the permit will come from Public Works, but kind of the more facilitation, you know, access to City Hall may come from council's office. Something we need to talk about more generally. That's going to take a lot of time. I do think on the our intention with short-term initiative, Complete Streets in Case, wasn't the capital plan. So in the capital plan, is where, you know, the new process will roll out. We spent a lot of time on it. I'm really excited to see how it works. That's for the streets that need complete redo. You know, we're kind of doing big capital work. I think it'd be nice to have, and this is where perhaps it's in the light on for like traffic calming, speed humps. There's some additional money we can put in there for painting intersections, you know, lane narrowing in certain intersections with paint. I know that's the combination of public art and traffic calming. Kind of perhaps giving case, hey, what would you prioritize? Some high-level projects of like carcinite markers here, carcinite markers there, planters here, planters there. I think that is more, at least what I was thinking when I put that council budget priority down, to give case in collaboration with Public Works and the planning department some freedom to have some funds to do things like that aren't, you know, hiring Carvo Paving and spending $3 million on redoing a street. So those are some of the things and then the large tree preservation policy, this has been percolating in my mind for so long that we're doing a great job on the public side of tree preservation and tree planting, but where we're losing our canopy year after year is on the private side. And what can we do to incentivize people to not only plant on the private side, but also maintain their legacy trees that are beautiful and not see them as risks or insurance hazards, but as the benefit they provide? And where my mind was going and was some sort of seed fund that if you had some tree a certain size, let's say it's 3 feet, you know, DBH, which is diameter at breast height. That's what they use in that world. And there may not be that many trees out there. You know, you can petition the city for funds to hire an arborist to check the health of that tree. And furthermore, if you want to take down a tree that size, you actually, unless there's risk to harm or immediate issues, that you would have to pull a permit to do that. And if it was otherwise healthy, you'd have to pay an impact fee to the city that would then seed that fund that would then help provide arborists and some assistance for folks with those big trees, because those big trees aren't just for that property, they serve a larger area. That's the general outline of what I'm trying to think about with that tree preservation policy, but that is very difficult because you're dealing with people's private property. It requires some buy-in. But we do have permitting on private property anyways through the building department, so there may be ways to work that out. That's high level where I was going when I kind of talked about that at the council retreat.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. So before others go, so as a process here, so Kyle has, for I think 2, maybe the third ideas, started to verbally detail what it is more specifically that council is proposing. And just so the administration knows, what we did in the retreats, 2 or 3 retreats, and they were public meetings, and actually we did have a couple members of the public join us, took notes, those are all public records, is we would workshop some ideas. Not everything that got brainstormed made it onto this list. This is a subset of what was there, and 1 or 2 council members may have championed to give an idea, and then others said, yeah, I'm also interested. And so you kind of see the bags as a referral just to little votes that we had. Anyway.
They were money bags.
Money bags, yes. So Councilman Baker is speaking on a couple of points that he, I think, championed or initiated. And so what I'd like to do for council members is ask you as homework. We've got a little bit more time. We got like 20 minutes more, but not a ton more time. On the backside of this meeting is evaluate what the administration has already in the budget, check your own notes on what you envision and proposed, and then if there's more work to be done from the city council advocate perspective, we need to take it on ourselves to detail what we're talking about, okay? And I've got some work to do on my own things as well. So that means a written description. Here's the purpose, here's how broad, here's how narrow, here's how it would work in plain English, here's a ballpark number, and better than a ballpark number would be a number supported with some cost evaluations. And then let's bring that back to the committee, make that part of the committee's record. I'll summarize that in this spreadsheet. I'll share that with the administration. This is just informational so that we can then respond to what the administration has provided with a little bit more detail. That then would, for some future finance committee hearing, equip us to say, all right, on these items, we're on the same page. These other items, we might let it drop. But this third category, council would like to persist in our proposal, and here's the concrete dollars that we're talking about. Also, here's how we would operationalize this. It might be a grant, it might be a new staff member that works for the administration, might be something else. All right, so we've got to do that work if we're going to be able to be effective in what we're proposing. I wonder if the council staff, Maureen, you recall, we used to have those forms for the council budget priorities process. Maybe we could dust those off. If you send them to me, I can modify. I hope they exist in Word document, not just PDF document, but we could use some version of that to serve as a sort of a template for the process I just described. And then that way there's a 2 or 3 page documentation for each concept. And then it goes, we have that plus the summary spreadsheet. Would that method work for council members? Any feedback on that? Okay, and it's not, busy work for busy work's sake, but I do think if we're going to propose.
Does that do more than what your chart here will do?
The chart will summarize the detail in a 2 or 3 page questionnaire, essentially. Councilwoman Steiner?
I personally think that is a great idea, and that's kind of how my mind works. And when I was looking over this this spreadsheet from Director Mahoney, initially I was thinking, oh, there's a column missing. So, like, for example, the affordable housing strategy, the administration's response, housing study completed. That's great. So was that the plan all along to just develop an affordable housing strategy and have it sit there? So we invested money in paying consultants that developed a strategy, and now what? So I can certainly take the lead in fleshing that out, what that would look like, but that's in my mind, I was already sort of breaking through that, and I think there does need to be some sort of justification for each of these priorities with those estimations. So, I mean, to me, it is almost like we're writing a grant to ourselves and providing that budget justification, providing a budget and providing a budget justification.
Thank you, Councilman Steiner. And to follow on that example, so the administration is correct. We have done some good work to analyze and plan. And if what council's proposing is that we're going to do some implementation or some training or some assistance or some grant, some direct assistance to residents, the ball's in our court to say exactly what we mean and then detail the concept of how it might work, okay? And we'll get to that stage. Councilwoman Striebeck, you're the lead on a couple of these, like the block club or community clubs. That's a huge concept. I suspect in your mind you've got something more specific in mind, and it's just we can work together to detail that a little bit.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I'm not convinced that that is something that the council should be doing. Because of the communication piece with that and because of the access to communication that the mayor has, I think that may be more appropriately coming out of the mayor's office. When there's communication that has to go to a block club about where you can go to cool if we lose our electric, instead of coming to us and then going out from us. It seems like that would be a quicker path to get them that information faster. Same thing with relief. If you've lost all the food in your refrigerator and freezer, how are you going to get some kind of a reimbursement gift card to be able to feed your family? I think that those kind of things coming directly from the mayor's office may be better than trying to put block club communications into the city council office.
Thanks, Councilwoman. So I think what Councilwoman Striebeck is referring to as part of the concept here is that there could be a emergency response component or function of the block clubs. Block clubs to date have been mostly, social clubs, getting to know your neighbor. There's value to all of that. In the old days, we had, now I'm going to blank on the name. Does anybody remember, Cindy? Well, it wasn't that. There was it was kind of a police or fire citizen volunteer group that did emergency response. So if somebody was missing or if there was a flood or something. We had it for years and then it went away. But there's a component there. So if that is something we wanted to emphasize, that in some ways is kind of a new thing. So us detailing that would be helpful. And then to your point, there is an integration with public safety response that probably is primarily under the public safety director as opposed to council. So, we can workshop how this would work, and maybe not all of this gets worked out by December 31, but at least we could say, here's the proposal, and for these purposes, which will be detailed by March 31, we propose reserving up to X dollars. And for Director Mahoney, if we, on the financial mechanics, if council were to reserve up to X dollars, that's different, isn't it, than saying X dollars shall be spent, right? So if we reserve an allocation for 2026, that gives us some financial capacity, but it also gives the city discretion to not use all of those funds if it turns out that we're not ready to use them, we need more time, or the need is smaller or something like that. Isn't that correct?
Well, any appropriation ordinance, I'm always happy when somebody doesn't spend the money.
Right. So there's that too. So city council can reserve up to certain funds. So what I think, and to the administration, I think that's largely what we're trying to do, is we're seeing good work done in the city, in the community, needs that are emerging or growing. The private tree concept is a good one. That's been an orphan issue for quite some time. I know Councilwoman Marks and I have been working on that, but not actually pulling the trigger in action on that. So you could say we want to reserve some financial capacity to begin working on that and see how it goes in year one. I'm going to stop talking. Other council members, do you want to address some of your priorities before we run out of time? Mr. Evans?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I want to amplify a lot of the remarks just made because I'm very much in agreement with them, especially I think there are just gigantic marks around the allocated money for the City Hall space and where we are with that plan and what we are actually going to spend in 2026, and also any monies appropriated towards studying a pier at Lakewood Park. Those are really big numbers and a lot of dollars, and a lot of the things we're talking about adding money to are not huge asks. So I think we can be able to make some real impact by reevaluating those huge numbers. Just specifically on a few things, one thing that didn't turn up here but keeps on coming up, their name has come up several times. I'm advocating for an increase in funding to Lakewood Alive. We are getting way more than they are given from us in terms of work for the budget right now. And even a modest increase in funding from the city can make a huge impact to that organization who's helping literally keeping people in their homes and dealing with things we don't even want to think about every day. So I think that's really important. I appreciate the administration has set aside CDBG funds for public art. I'd still like to increase that budget and make that funding permanent. And also to Councilman Baker's point about complete streets and traffic calming, I think we should be taking a proactive approach in addition to our welcoming our neighbors to help get traffic calming on their streets. And finding those streets that are really problematic, especially where there are schools, and being proactive and taking out a certain number of streets every year and installing traffic calming on our own instead of relying on citizens to do that. So that's just a quick take on my three things. I've already emailed Director Mahoney and Councilman Bullock about two of those. But again, I appreciate the conversation with everybody, and thanks for working on this.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Can we have some... Councilman Steiner would like to talk about the final priority, which is the composting, and we've got some members of the public. Before doing that, can we all commit to using November 17 as a deadline for ourselves to get in these worksheets that we'll work with the council staff to circulate amongst ourselves. So we'll compile those things no later than November 17 to begin to give clarity to all of these matters. Is that realistic for everybody? Okay, thank you. And Director Mahoney, we'll try to communicate as early as possible, just to share information about, everything, okay? And there's going to be multiple steps. So all I'm suggesting to my council colleagues is that we more strongly detail what it is that we're proposing. A proposal isn't the same thing as agreeing to implement the priority. And then if we were to try to do that, we still have to, we're going to engage in good faith dialogue with you, with the administration, and then we're going to have to also address the point about how we fund, how we allocate. So I'm not taking anything for granted at all. I'm just trying to, be a traffic cop up here, if that's all right.
Yeah,
Any thoughts?
and I think the point of my response to you is that council and the administration are pretty much on the same page with a lot of council's priorities. So that was the point of me putting this
Wonderful.
together.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and you are being very collegial. We appreciate the administration's support and respect for these different items. And they're not just ours, they're yours too, because I know the city does a lot of good work every day to identify and respond to the needs in the community. Okay, Councilwoman Steiner, would you like to tee up the composting?
Yeah, I'll tee up the composting. So thank you very much, Chair Bullock. So I've been working with some residents in the community that are very passionate about composting and trying to work through with Director Byington as well on this program, essentially providing a citywide composting service to the residents of Lakewood. I feel it's a low-hanging fruit that we can do. We have the Climate Action Plan that was approved. Was that 2022? 2022. And again, an example of another plan that was there and is extensive and intensive. And there are things that we can do that are lower hanging that we can start to really accomplish the goals of that. There was a lot of time and effort put into that. A lot of people invested. And I don't want to see another plan just sit there and not do anything about it. So I've had some conversations. Currently, we do have composting in the city through Lakewood City Schools, and then there's also the bins that are over there at Madison Park that actually Madison Core Community Coalition started composting last summer, as part of trying to decrease our own footprint that we have, trash footprint. So I feel that it is something that's low-hanging. I've reached out to Rust Belt writers to try to get some quotes, get some information. I've talked to Lakewood City Schools to see how they did theirs, how they were able to implement it, and I think that we can certainly implement it here, and it's something that the residents do want. They're passionate about it, so I'm going to turn it over. It's okay. I'll turn it back to you, and if you want to invite our residents to come up and give some comment and feedback.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Yeah, and I support you in supporting that. Councilwoman Marks, do you want to mention anything? I think you've been working on this as well.
Yes, and I'll give my time to the residents who are here to speak for it, and I can deal with public art, when I do my writing. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Later, if I'm addressing you correctly.
Harry Later.
Just Harry, okay.
Yeah. Actually, Kathleen is another member of our Lakewood composting team.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Good evening, Chair Bullock, Vice President Baker, and Councilwoman Strabig, and other council members, and the rest of city government. My name is Harry Later. I live in Ward 2, and I'm here to speak in support of including a citywide composting program that would be free for all residents in the 2026 budget. In 2023, Council adopted the Climate Action Plan with a goal of 95% organic waste diversion by 2030. Strategy number 37 specifically recommends partnering with Rust Belt Riders for municipal composting. Council President Keppel has already identified this as a 2026 budget priority. I believe that both Councilwoman Hamilton Steiner and Councilman Tom Bullock have agreed to co-sponsor this legislation. Shaker Heights, Beechwood already have free composting. Cleveland Heights and University Heights also have various versions of free composting for all the residents. Lakewood is falling behind. Our neighbors, Lakewood is falling behind our neighbors on this important amenity. We're not starting from scratch here. As Councilwoman Hamilton Steiner mentioned, Cove Community Center, Lakewood High School, and at least one elementary school already successfully use Rust Belt Riders. Dr. Christine Palumbo, the Assistant Superintendent of Lakewood Schools, has expressed support for this initiative, given the school's positive experience with composting programs. Both Lakewood and Madison Parks have existing drop-off locations. We simply need to make this service free and accessible to all residents. And we also need to provide some more drop-off locations. We have at least 56 Lakewood residents who have already signed our petition across all 4 wards in Lakewood who support this, and we're hoping to get at least 75 by mid-November, if not more. The infrastructure is in place. We have resident and school support. There's no need for a pilot program, I believe. Funding sources exist through Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District, and there is the potential for reallocation of sustainability budget resources. This is good environmental policy, good fiscal policy, and responsive governance. I respectfully request that the Finance Committee recommend including citywide composting in the 2026 budget. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Harry, or Mr. Lader. Having had a chance to dialogue a little bit with Councilwoman Hamilton Steiner, I think the idea here would be to expand upon the program that already exists at Madison Park and Lakewood Park. I believe those are the 2 locations where people who subscribe currently can drop off composting, and it's higher quality than your backyard composting. I do it in my backyard, but it doesn't include meat and eggs and poultry and cheese and things like that, but Rust Belt Riders can. So the idea would be that those who would find that useful could then just go and do it, okay? I think with our budget form, proposal form, we could detail a little bit more on what that means. Is that anybody, is it for 1 year? Is it for a longer time period? Would the contract with the vendor be based on number of people or tonnage or what? And we can find out some more of that information. But the advocates and the residents have made a good point that we committed in our climate action plan to doing a number of things. This is one of them, and this is a turnkey way that any resident could participate, even if you live in an apartment and you don't have a backyard, or you're mobility challenged and it's hard for you to go wrestle your compost bin in the backyard. There could be another option or a second option, which is to support and expand the Cuyahoga Water and Soil Conservation District. Soil and Water Conservation District, who've been doing a training program for years. They're already funded to do that, but they only do so many programs in the city, and then they'll sell you a $50 bin, or it was $50 way back when I got mine. But potentially we could also support or enhance that program if that was appealing. So there's a number of concepts, but I thank you for the proposal. I think you've got some proposed resolution language that
Yes.
Councilwoman Hamilton Steiner may initiate. I believe Councilwoman Marks is also interested in co-signing. So a number of us may join you in that. So more to come on this. Any other points you want to raise, Councilwoman?
No, I think Mr. Lader has raised all the good points. It's, I think it's a good thing. It's a low-hanging fruit, and just, as we're thinking about the budget, and as we talked a little bit, I think it's important that we are responsible with residents' tax money, and I think we have to remember that ultimately we serve them, and we're included in that, but I think we have to think of making sure that, especially in this climate, making sure that our residents are getting the benefit of their tax dollars, and then it's the benefits that they want. Well, not just the benefits that they need, but also benefits that they want. And if our tax receipts have increased, they should see some of that increasing back. And as Councilman Baker has said, we don't necessarily have a lot of financial control over the taxes and the tax rates and fiscal, because we're not ultimately the fiscal agent of property taxes. I think it's important that if residents feel that we're using money responsibly and they're getting a benefit, it's an added bonus to one, living in this community, right? It's something that we can start to say, hey, you live in Lakewood, this is a program that we have. But two, it shows that we're also being responsive to their needs and their wants as well. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're at time. Mr. Baker?
Yeah, I'd be really interested, whether it's from my colleagues or the public, just to see kind of like, I'm familiar with Rust Belt Riders fee service, right? You pay them, put a bucket out, they pick it up. It's interesting to see like what that looks like for Shaker Heights, how much it costs. And I'm sure it like takes solid waste out of the bins, and that may have a benefit. So I'm curious to see that kind of analysis, like scale. What are we talking about budget-wise? And I assume that's what's going to come next. So and be happy to support it though, because I think it's the right thing to do, and it can help get waste streams out of our system. Thanks.
Okay, any final comments? We're at time, and I should give it to the chairman next to me for the next hearing. Okay, thank you, everybody. Good discussion. Thanks to the administration, and without objection, the Finance Committee is adjourned.
I will take a 4 or 5 minute break and then come back.
Oh, gosh, we did a whole weekend. I mean, we went golfing on the only Jack Nicholson designed course in Northeast Ohio out in the area at Eagle Valley. And it was so incredibly hard. We golfed with this one that was a regular there, and he just we would have had to watch him. I mean, it was crazy. Oh, he has such a good time with it. Lost a ton of balls with the Black River rules.
That's a pain. I got Lynn Harwood blowing me up about the road. Well, the neighbor, the pole location, what do we do? AT&T, oh, there's stuff there. Like, I don't know, it's your fucking property. You didn't have any of this figured out before you're like, I'm building townhomes? Yeah. He's like, now that I paid my $13,000 with engineering fees, I need your help. And I was like, oh, well, okay, cool. You still owe me $32 grand for the building permit? So,
You know this costs money, right?
yeah, right. No. Wait, what am I supposed to do about the AT&T fiber that's blowing through the city? No, it's okay. Older dude, yeah. I'll be doing that these days. Way easier than oh yeah.
Our break was slightly less than I thought it would be, but let's go ahead and get started because, well, I guess it's dark out, so there's not much we can do outside, but I'm sure we have better things at home. So I'll go ahead at 7:20 and call the Housing Planning and Development Committee to order. The first agenda item is the review and approval of the September 8th, 2025 Housing Planning and Development Committee meeting minutes. I will go ahead and move to approve those. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? No? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Then it's passed. And now we'll move on to docket item, the next one, which is communication from Assistant Planning Director Boss regarding the zoning refresh project. And I believe there's a presentation that I'm excited to see for a second time, but some of my colleagues will see for the first time. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the time. This obviously we could spend 2-3 hours on this, which I don't really have the time. I'm sure my colleagues here would not like that, but I'm going to try to move through this quickly so that we can just get to questions and discussion on things, and I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. So this is a lot. This is kind of where this step of the process, and I'll forward it to that kind of the overview here of where we are in this 7-step project. We are dead center. The district and use standards, there's a lot of meat and a lot of detail in these, and I will tell you that we're probably about 50% done in terms of the drafts. They're very draft. And we're still figuring out a lot of things in here, and I think that was pretty evident on the last zoning policy advisory committee that we had in August. I got a couple responses from the ZPAC members that provided kind of additional questions, additional comments. We've sent those back to House Hill Levine, and then based on this communication, I'm anticipating comments, questions, potentially from any of the council members that care to submit those. And we'll integrate those as well as we work through just some issues and kind of the pertinent topics with each of these. We'll highlight kind of the 3 things that I'll move through their slides. These are House L. Levine slides that we used for the ZPAC meeting back in August. The 3 main things that we're still kind of wrestling with at a macro level is the multi-dwelling districts and how you handle kind of what density where in the city. Was kind of one of the objectives of the process was to try to find kind of room to squeeze more density. And I hesitate to say more density in Lakewood, but it's really kind of the 100-year character of Lakewood of how to reflect the existing fabric of the community in our zoning code, which in that the 96 and subsequent revisions kind of went towards that time, what was kind of the general direction, that time frame, which was very heavy single-family zoning, and try to bring it back, our zoning code back to reflect kind of that 100-year-old fabric of the community. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the multi-dwelling structures and districts. The second piece is the municipal district. It's a new district really kind of born of the C4 schools district that's in our zoning code, but trying to reflect schools, parks, potentially libraries, some of those other municipal-based structures and uses that you could treat as its own district. And then the last one that we're currently wrestling with is the plan development process, and try to see if there is some efficiency that can be squeezed out of that in terms of potentially delineating between major and minor projects. How do you treat it as an overlay or as a total rezoning? Are there some efficiencies that we can get for the plan development process out of that? And so I will. So this just, there's a couple of slides that kind of provide a summary of a lot of the districts. You can see on this one, that on the left is kind of our current districts. On the right is our proposed districts right now. As it was back in August, we went through this. And so as I talk about the multi-dwelling districts there, a lot of it is kind of districts sliding into a new designation. As we've gone through this, the RS1, it's really the single dwelling residential 1, 2, and 3 that reflect the old low, medium, and high density districts. The lagoon is the lagoon. RM1 is kind of would be the first stage of this mixed or multi-dwelling level that really is pulled from the R2, but looking to insert some additional density in there. And then I'll talk about the RM2 district here in a little bit, because we're moving in a different direction, at least after the ZPAC meeting. The multifamily district, the old traditional kind of medium and high density multifamily, talking about bigger apartment buildings, trying to blend that into one, because there really isn't a whole lot of difference in our current code between medium and high density multifamily dwellings, and it does not reflect the actual kind of fabric and the structures that are out there in those districts. And then you can see the commercials are generally staying the same, but we are doing a lot of work in terms of permitted and conditional uses and updating definitions to go for things like hotels that we don't have a definition for in our current zoning code, and then pulling C4 into a new municipal district and addressing a lot of questions there. The overlays, I will say these are a work in progress. You can see the two overlays that we have currently, the historic and then the mixed use, and then shifting over into retaining a historic, but really the mixed use has been kind of worked through and adapted into a couple different potential outcomes. One is the adaptive reuse overlay, which is specifically, obviously, targeted towards reusing structures and allowing a little bit more flexibility to incentivize reusing structures rather than a demo and new construction. And then looking at potentially having that minor PD designation or delineation there into an overlay vice a total rezoning, which could offer some efficiencies in the process for those smaller projects. And so that mixed use overlay, which for us, probably in the last 10 years, has really equated to, if you look at the call out at the top, these are kind of my notes from the ZPAC meeting, that the majority of those mixed use overlay applications have all been for projects that just wanted ground floor residential, which our code doesn't allow for ground floor residential in the commercial districts, which is where most of these happen. And so we've worked to try to replace that with either updated use regulations and actually having a use that is ground floor residential in a commercial district, or a minor PD process, or an adaptive reuse overlay. So that's why these things are kind of getting flushed out, but we are still working in that direction. The zoning map, and I will note the zoning map has a couple issues. Just if you don't get hung up on the colors and stuff, they're still working through that. I understand the main branch of the library is not a PD. That was pointed out by almost every ZPAC member in their notes. But some of the simple changes that we've made, I've called out at the top. We're proposing the existing C1 zone that's on Madison West that was put there at some point in time and has been I will say, a hurdle for a lot of business, just typical retail business zoning. We're proposing for that to be redesignated just and to join the rest of the C2 district on Madison. We had a question, do we need to change the name of the central business district towards something more contemporary? So we're looking through that. And then the extent of a new M district, that municipal district, and I'll talk through that here in a couple slides when we get to the M slide. And so, but you can see on the left that there's really no major changes proposed to kind of the single family RS 1, 2, and 3, that low, medium, and density, the lagoon, the RM1, there is a little bit, and we'll talk through that in a second, but that generally reflects the R2 zoning that's out there that will transfer over to that. The commercial, the industrial, and the PD stuff. And then the major changes is really the RM2, which is a new zoning classification that we're looking at. The multifamily kind of consolidation of both the medium and high density old multifamily districts into a single multifamily district, and then the municipal district. So the RM2 district kind of grew out of consideration for trying to find a way to allow higher levels of density where they're appropriate. And specific as you're talking about transit lines and you're talking about our commercial corridors. And so this really had its beginning in kind of that, what is a contemporary push for transit-oriented development and trying to find a way, as you go down Detroit and you go down Madison, there are often larger apartment buildings that are either just off the corridor or, the old kind of row houses and something like that. I think it's on Lakeland or Westwood that are close to Detroit. Some of that type of higher density development that was oriented on transit lines 100 years ago and could still be oriented on transit lines today.
Mr. Chair, can I interject real fast? Mr. Boss, can you go back one slide or two and one more? So the RM2 new proposal is just where the black lines are, which is?
Nope, that is, RM2 doesn't exist on this map.
Okay.
Yeah, those are smaller dark lines. Those are the historic districts. I know that's why.
Okay.
Don't get hung up on the map, Councilman. It's kind of a mess
so,
right now. Yeah.
So just to get my head wrapped around what you're proposing, we have it, or that's a future slide, or
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll get to it here right now.
I'll watch the movie. Thanks.
Sorry. So we originally approached this, Councilman, on RM2, this new district, as, is this something that we actually want to designate parcels and call it, instead of, it's R2 today or commercial or, whatever, do we want to actually handpick the parcels that are out there and say, you now live in an RM2 district that's eligible for higher density consideration? So the consultants work through a couple of examples of kind of, you can see this as just an example, kind of, it's centralized in the community. It would be, you would want to do this along the whole length of the Madison and Detroit corridor. They were just trying to give width, kind of north-south width context here for, is it a half mile? Is it 500 feet? Is it 250 feet? And that is a difficult kind of thing to drill down into when you're trying to designate, and then on a parcel by parcel level is how do you want to rezone this? And ultimately, I think the direction that we're going to go, that we're recommending to go, is a much more flexible, and it is an overlay. It is a TOD overlay that someone could apply for to get the flexibility for higher density. Would have to go through an overlay review process with Planning Commission. And so we feel like that's a lot more appropriate than changing the map, which is much more permanent and much more difficult. So hopefully, I don't know if that answers your question, Councilman, on that, but.
Okay, where would that overlay be eligible? Anywhere in the city?
That is something that we would have to go back to kind of these limits. You would want to limit it based on the transit corridors. That's a little easier to do, whether it's
when the Lakewood circulator comes back and the scooters come back?
a quarter mile from or something, but,
Okay.
yeah.
And maybe not now, but at some point in the conversation. So what does the conversation look like between the city and the property owners who are neighbors of a spot that tomorrow might include this new zoning, but when they bought it, it didn't? So, and I realize I'm about to invite a deep, eternally deep legal rabbit hole where the attorneys are going to say, well, back in the origins of zoning law, this is what this means. But, you know, some understanding of, I mean, the whole exercise is we want to update and modernize, and that means that we're changing, in some ways, the foundational DNA of property investment and rules, and that does entail shifting what neighbor A thought he or she bought into years ago, and now neighbor B is doing something different. So we don't have to stop the conversation right now, but that's kind of on my mind.
It's a very challenging part of the process. It's having this as an overlay kind of backs it off a little bit in terms of that like immediacy and the permanency of that decision. But you're right insofar as this does have to be, this is one of the major changes. It does have to be communicated in terms of the things that are being considered.
And while I'm at it, and this is also going to sting, it's a layperson's feedback that our boards and commissions are pro-development, whatever that means. And I may have even used that language sometimes. I remember going in to try to stop McDonald's back in the day, and that was not successful, nor should it have been, because that was used by right. And we did negotiate with the business owner to get a traffic light and other quality measures. But if we contemplate adding new options to new parcels, and we put that on our boards and commissions, typically our boards and commissions are, I mean, isn't this an accurate statement? They're telling the property owner or the applicant, okay, we're going to advise your application and shape your application based on the rules and what the underlying law says, but they're usually not trying to tell the applicant, no, you shouldn't do this. And that then gives the neighbors some frustration, because the neighbors are saying, well, this is out of context. The neighbors want the planning commission and the architectural board of review to go further than they typically have done. And so there's this mismatch of expectations. And I'm not coming here saying I know the answer to this, but I am mindful of what the process is. In some ways, maybe the whatever we're proposing to change should just be explicit in the law, so that eliminates or at least narrows the guesswork and the judgment calls we're asking our volunteer boards and commission members to make.
So I'd like to respond to that, because it's a tension, and I think Assistant Director Ross is explaining it well. You can either, so I think the analysis, at least from the ZPAC, was that these are existing issues. If you go from Detroit and you walk down any street, north or south, you will see a light density and then it work down, whether it's an apartment building that kind of L's off, that's further up the street or down the street, or some of those townhomes that Assistant Director Boss was talking about. So it already exists, right, in our lived, and you could rezone them, which is an aggressive move, which would rezone all these parcels that are near Detroit or Madison or, Clifton. Or you could do an overlay, which does allow for citizen input and does allow for neighbor input, and would put whatever parameters we saw fit on it, screening, certain setbacks. That's where the interplay between the building code and the zoning code works. But it's you either do nothing and kind of have a mismatch where different streets, and it may, I've seen quadplexes in the middle of blocks in some places, and I don't understand fully why. So the analysis, at least at the ZPAC, was let's try to keep that density closer to the transit hub. So that, because every single street in Lakewood, you are next to a higher use when you hit, I lived in that when I was a kid. I lived next to Detroit, to the higher use. So there's always two parcels in every street that do that. And I do think that having the middle ground allows at least there to be some recourse in a public meeting for that resident to have a comment about it. But it's not easy.
No, and I think that's this and the difficult kind of, I guess, part of the process, Councilman, is where we're at right now is you are starting to blend And these standards do really, it's that overlap of the use and then like those district standards, as the chair mentioned. And so it's, if you have a 3-family home in this area, what are now the district standards of the setbacks in the front yards that associate with that structure so that it conforms with the rest of the community. And so when we get into some of the subsequent slides here, you can see they do adjust, lot size. So you have to, if you want a single-family home in the RM1, or what I think as an example, you have to have a certain size lot. If you want to go to a 2-family home or a 2-unit home in that same district, now you have to have a slightly larger lot. Like there are all those types of standards that you can incrementally change based on the density, so that you're not saying that it's a 4,000 square, there's 5 4,000 square foot lots, and you could put a 4-unit apartment building right next to a single-family home on the same size lot with the same setbacks. And it's like the setbacks may, all of those things are meant to kind of adjust the density so that the impact is generally the same across the community, but allowing for it. Because, like the chair said, you drive down any street in Lakewood and you'll see like 4-bedroom apartment. Is that a 3 or a 2-family home? I don't like. The object of a lot of these changes are to bring a lot of things into conformity that are not in conformity right now. And we have the difficult job of then, responding to realtors and homeowners and stuff and saying that, no, you can't put another unit on your 3rd floor because you live in an R2 zone. And even though someone told you that it was a 3-family home when it was built, you live in an R2 home and you can't have 3 dwelling units. Or if your home, God forbid, burned to the ground, you'd have to replace it with a single-family home instead of the current 3-family home that you live in. It's like we worked through a lot of these things over the last couple of years because it's hard, but you want to bring things into conformity so that people can do things by right, the right way, without having to go to Planning Commission and BZA and you put all that weight on those boards and commissions. So it's a balance, but. I'll try to. MD district, that's the consolidation of the two together. The standards weren't too far apart, so we're working through those, but it's the same areas that they are now. But I will say, this is one area I think we are looking to kind of go back a little bit further in history in terms of the density in a multifamily unit, so that you don't necessarily only allow our multifamily, especially I think it's the medium or the high density, is very oriented towards the towers. And it's towers with a lot of green space around them, which is a very 70s, 60s, 70s kind of architectural concept that frankly wastes a lot of space. And so, there's good things about it, there's bad things about it, but we're looking to get multifamily more so on the south side of Lake, Clifton Road, east side Clifton Road. You get some higher density multifamily buildings, or at least allow that if that's what people would like to do.
Implicit in your statement is not a tower, but 4 or 5-story or something?
If you want to build a tower, you can build a tower. But if you don't want to build a tower, if you want to actually, allowing smaller setbacks rather than our current multifamily, all the setbacks are a function of building height. And so if it's a tall building, you have to have a really large setback. And it's a proportional kind of setback design to try to get that open space, generally for parking and other things, so that it's just not something that you see in the buildings from the 20s and the 30s. They're very transit oriented and kind of that, it's more Lakewood character than, I would argue, than the Gold Coast is kind of more of a,
North Olmsted.
It's a different, it's Lakewood, but from a different time frame than when Lakewood was really built out. So this is the municipal district, kind of an initial cut. If you included schools, libraries, parks in there, this is a big work in progress, and it is really, what is the scope, the regulations for each of those uses. And then one of the biggest things to consider in this based on the lessons learned from the C4 schools district, is how does a property become a municipal district property, and how does a property leave the municipal district? It's a rezoning, so it typically would involve council review and approval, but it's something that we need to have a process in the code for, in the event that someone would want to divest or the city would want to divest. Not that we would actively look to divest a park, but if you wanted to bring a park into the district, or it's one of those things that we need to be prepared and have the process in place for, as well as regulations. So this is kind of getting towards that. This is all the single family, towards what we were kind of talking about earlier, Councilman, but you get into single family is very close to kind of what we have on the books now. The adjustments that have been made, you can look at the kind of current standards on the left and the proposed standards on the right. The biggest changes are in the frontages and in the lot sizes. So you could see like the R1L, our low density, the minimum lot size right now is 14,000 square feet. And so we would look to reduce that down to 9,000 square feet. And then as you go through medium and low, you can kind of see the reductions. There's those reductions, and then the frontages. Just as an example, like low density, you have to have a 70-foot frontage as a minimum now to have a buildable lot. We would take that down to 50 feet. Now, all of these were based on these standards. Then the setbacks, as you kind of work your way down that table, the height, the setbacks, those really haven't changed a whole lot. Total impervious lot coverage, those things, a lot of those we changed in the last couple years to kind of bring them up to a standard. We're just incorporating them in here. But the changes of the lot size and frontage specifically, just real, they had this nice like animation in these slides. But this was something that I think I actually covered. It might have been the last update. They did a conformity study of all of our districts, so the residential districts. And so the table on the left kind of shows you like the percentage of parcels, the number of parcels that kind of fall within that band of conformity. And so what you're trying to do here with the sizes is you're trying to get it down. You're trying to get that buildable lot size down to an acceptable level of minimizing the number of parcels that would still be non-conforming on both the frontages and the lot sizes without being like overly onerous and shrinking it down so much that someone in the R1L, like a bunch of people in the R1L could be like, oh, well, I'm splitting my lot in half now and I'm selling the other half to build a house. And so we're recommending that 9,000 square foot because it brings you down to a good level of conformity where there's only, I think it's only 35 parcels would be non-conforming still. And then the frontage is 50 feet, so that would bring you down to, it's like 25 of those parcels would be non-conforming. So you're reducing your number of non-conformities from the top of the chart, which is 149. So there's 149 R1L lots out there right now that don't meet our minimum buildable standards. So if God forbid their house burned down or something happened to it, they would actually have to come to BZA to get a variance to rebuild their home. And so you want to reduce that as much as you can. But again, without like going so low that you're increasing the opportunities for people to start splitting their lots and kind of changing the character. So as we move through all these single family districts, this is all part of that past conformity analysis that we settled kind of on these numbers as the recommended numbers. And it was all based on reviewing the tables and kind of where those things played out in terms of trying to reduce the overall nonconformities without changing the character of the district. So this kind of brings me to the next topic about density. So now we get it back into the multi-dwelling. So what was R2, which is the majority of our zoning district in the city right now. I think it's almost like 80% of the parcels in the city are R2. So those would become what is now in this chart RM1. And so we did do the conformity analysis on these. So that's where you get like the minimum lot size of 4,000 square foot was what was recommended with a 40-foot frontage for a single-family home. So currently in R2, or what would become RM1, you're allowed to have a 1 and a 2-unit home or dwelling. What we kind of introduced to the ZPAC was that what if we allowed up to a 4-unit dwelling? There are R2 parcels out there right now that have those little four apartment building. And so we looked at that. That was actually something that now, so this is an example of what I was talking about, kind of that incremental increase. If you look at the proposed standards under right under RM1 for the like lot size as an example. So if you wanted to build a 1 or a 2-unit home, the lot size is 4,000 square foot. Now, if you wanted to go up to 3 units, now you're adding it's got to be 6,000 square foot for size. If you wanted to go to 4, it would be 8,000 square foot. So that just provides kind of the size and the depth to start accommodating that additional density without unduly impacting the neighborhood.
Mr. Chairman, can I interject another question?
Yep, please.
So this is helpful. The yellow comment at the top says, may be too much for this district. Now, that's great. How do we know that's, what standard are we aiming for when we make that statement?
So this is kind of that. It is a subjective standard based on the discussion and where the ZPAC and ultimately where City Council wants to go with this recommendation.
Policy choice.
It's a policy
Yeah,
choice.
Understood. But look, I'm a student here, and I appreciate and I'm absorbing a lot. And what I thought you were going to say is Parmalee knows, and he lays down the marker. We all follow him. But I think we're challenging ourselves to ask and answer exactly the right kinds of questions. But I think what we said at the beginning of this process is well, first of all, it sounds like we're doing multiple things. Some of what we're doing is a cleanup, a tidy up to address a lot of non-conforming. I think it was Alison or Bannock who used to talk about, or who still does talk about, you look at your own house and you try to figure out who did this to the plumbing, and the answer is Uncle Frank. Who's Uncle Frank? Some guy in the 50s who knew somebody who did something and nobody wrote it down, and now you're supposed to make head and tail out of it and then get a building permit that's valid. So a lot of that's happened not just in homes, but I guess in neighborhoods and actually in the public sewer, according to the public works directors. So part of what we're doing is tidying things up so that we're not, in all cases, you're seeking change. We're just seeking to maintain the status quo in a more effective manner. But we're also, in this whole exercise, trying to make the city our community more successful in its various goals for housing policy. And maybe you could just recap that thought here, because I think what we're probably going to say is needs are changing, family sizes have changed. I recall, like we said a couple of meetings back, that nothing much has changed physically since the 70s in terms of our built environment, yet the school-age population and the total population is really reduced, and you don't have many homes for sale in Lakewood. The inventory is small, so it's not vacant homes, it's smaller family sizes. So how do we be successful for all of our different goals, inducing or inviting new kinds of development? So this is great questions we're asking here. So we want to maintain and clean up on one hand, but also improve on another hand. So we might want 4 suiters in parts of town, right?
I think that's kind of the policy divide question. Like where is that divide? Because
but we're saying probably not in which.
And this is, I guess, this is the crux of what the direction that we're looking at, Councilman, right now, is that if you drive up and down an R2 street now, where would you see those 4 unit buildings, they're typically closer to Detroit and Madison in general. You're not going to see them typically in the middle of a block. So, but what you may see in the middle of a block is a 3-unit house that you don't even know is a 3-unit house right now because of the way that it's typically, 2 units up front. There may be the entry to a 3rd unit in the back. So by limiting the RM1 or the new RM1 district to 3-unit dwellings, that's really kind of bringing our code back to where it was 100 years ago. But the other benefit is for the single-family and the 2-family homes that are the majority in those districts, it also allows people to do an ADU if they wanted to within that kind of, without having to make it a massive effort, which I'll talk about ADUs if we have time, but generally you want to make those easier. Like a lot of these things, we're trying to make a lot of this stuff just where they're conforming, vice like an exception.
That's helpful. So
Yeah.
our markers so far I've heard is we want to likely add density or give permission to add density, successfully conforming to code, all that,
Yep.
and not shoehorn too much into the wrong spots. And the other marker then, or the other ruler metric we're using is what traditionally worked way back when we first built the town.
Yep.
And that is 3 suiters, which if I recall, those are all grandfathered in. We don't permit any new ones today,
Yep.
but you're contemplating maybe tomorrow.
And that's the problem is those grandfathered ones in there are nonconformities that it makes it very hard to do just about anything with those homes. So they can maintain them kind of as is over
I see.
time.
Okay, so
Yeah.
even if we didn't want to add 3 suiters, we at least want to be able to update and maintain the existing ones.
Yeah, and I think this interplays with the transit overlay potentially, which is if you don't allow 4 units in RM1, you can allow 3 units in RM1, but then allow 4 units within the overlay closer to Detroit or Madison. So you kind of like, this is the conversation with ZPAC, is you mimic what we have today, and you allow those people with 3-unit buildings to invest in them substantially, because if you make too much of an investment, then it may change the use categorization, and they can't do it anymore, right?
Is that, Mr. Parmalee, what you're seeing on the 3 suiters?
I mean, the amount of existing nonconformities we have in the city are insane. I mean, if we took, Rosewood, right, Tom? I mean, that's R2. To be able to take a 3-family that's already a 3-family, but we can't consider it a 3-family because it's an in-law suite, because you can't have more than a 2-unit in an R2 zoning district. I mean, it'd make moving mom and dad in easier. I mean, it'd lighten the load on your aunt, your uncle, or, whatever that is. But to Dave's point, what he's really preaching, and I can appreciate, is just taking, that 60% of the city that's an existing nonconformity, and, we get the developments that come in, or the permit applications, or the plans that come in for these folks, and we have to tell them no, and we have to turn them away.
60%?
Well, we have a ton of nonconformities. I mean, we have probably somewhere around 3,200 3-family homes that we have as 3 families just because somebody wrote 3-family on a housing file back in the 60s. So that was the only thing that's given it the legal right to be a 3-family, and that they maintain that housing license through the years. To be able to take a lot of the giant 3-families and a lot of the properties we have on Clifton and wherever the zoning district's going to be. I just talked to somebody that bought a property over on Bell and Clifton about a week ago, that they bought the property. The realtor told them it was a 3-family. They purchased the property. It's not a 3-family. It's a 2-family with a non-conforming in-law suite above the garage. And these are the properties that you drive past them 1,000 times and you really don't know they're there until you get to be extremely intimate with the neighborhood and the people that are making the investment. And I could ramble on all night about that.
Okay, that's fascinating. I did not know that it was that
And
extensive.
to open the door for the ADU that right now, your average Joe to do, I'm in the middle of it right now. It's extremely expensive. And if you're not
the homeowner that has the wherewithal to do all the work yourself, I don't know how anybody can afford to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So just to close this out, so the column that's under RM2, that was kind of going back to that original discussion is, where do you throw that on the map? We decided that the best direction to go with that would be an overlay. Someone could apply for that kind of a TOD, or we may name it something else. That would allow you, within the RM1 district, or potentially the other districts along Detroit and Madison, which there's not a whole lot of other, single-family homes along Detroit and Madison. Most of them are currently R2. That would allow you then to apply and get approval for potentially a 4-unit, potentially townhomes, like those things. But again, as you go down that column, if you took away the 1, 2, and 3 unit that would be allowed by right in there, the standard's kind of 4,000 townhomes, or 2,000 per townhome, depending on the size, and you go through a lot of those things. That's where those standards come in then, that in order to get that increase in density, you have to abide by, in many cases, different setbacks or different frontage requirements to make sure that it all kind of fits. So that you're not trying to jam, 6 townhomes in a 4,000 square foot lot because your designer says that they can make it work. There's height transition standards, like there's things that have to be met, that would have to be met as part of this to try to keep the neighborhood generally the way that it's looked for 100 years. But you're allowing through the by right, the underlying zoning with RM1 and going up to potentially 3 units, and then allowing an overlay that would allow you to go higher than that based on the lot size through planning commission approval as an overlay. That's how you get the increase in density on the margins, kind of in the neighborhoods as they are now, kind of a modern interpretation of that, the zoning from 100, when it wasn't zoning 100 years ago, but the code applications before Euclid. So that's what we're wrestling with in terms of the multi-dwelling districts, and trying to figure out how we can have the tools in there to allow people to introduce density on the margins in the neighborhoods, as in many cases it's already there. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Jump through. Like this is an example of the different height transition standards that you can apply to try to right-size those things in a neighborhood. It's an example of like a graphic. This is not a like draft graphic or something, but these are the types of graphics that we also want to try to integrate into this. We don't have graphics now, but graphics are super helpful for people trying to consider kind of what their home looks like or what it could look like based on standards, and trying to illustrate those standards. The C standards, there's not a lot of changes, but I will go into, we talked through a lot of this. I'm sorry, this is the summary of the uses in here. We talked about the discussion over supporting up to 3 units in RM1. We'll see how the short-term rental regulations that are currently being considered kind of play out, and if those need to be integrated in. The ZPAC did talk and wanted to talk about allowing in the MD district, what our current multifamily district, of potentially allowing 1 and 2 unit dwellings in those. There are 1 and 2 unit dwellings in our multifamily districts right now that are nonconformities. And so is it a bad thing to allow those? So we're still kind of working through a lot of these things, and these slides are these are dated from August and pre-discussion. So if I go to this is the commercial district. So some of the things that we've discussed here, the ground floor dwelling units in C. So they actually broke out and recommended having kind of its own use category of a dwelling multi-unit rear ground floor. As we start to consider more accessibility things and requirements, having a rear ground floor dwelling unit is not a bad thing. It wouldn't change the character of most of the storefronts of those old streetcar apartment buildings with the retail on the first floor, of having a dwelling unit in the back. Would allow accessible living without changing the necessary character of a lot of buildings on our commercial corridors. Breaking out hotel versus motel in terms of definitions and where you allow those. I think the general direction we're looking to push, and I actually, frankly, I may look at submitting a code amendment sooner than this project to get hotels as permitted in all of our C districts, because it's a need that we have. But retaining motel, but restricting that potentially just to the C3 district based on the design and impact of those structures versus a hotel. Talked about pet boarding, expanding that into the industrial area to give more space for that. And then there's always a discussion on parking, and parking as a principal use. Right now it's allowed. I think there were some folks that wanted to kind of push that towards making that a conditional use that has to be reviewed every time. If you want to knock something down to make it into a parking lot, that should be something that's reviewed and not just allowed by right.
Yeah, and that discussion revolved a lot around screening as well. So it gives you an ability to require certain screening if you have a parking lot on Detroit, for example.
Trying to be conscious of time, Mr. Chair, but so the next couple slides just go into these overlays. The PD district is the biggest one right now. Currently, our plan development process is it's one size fits all. Whether you're the minimum of a 10,000 square foot development, or you're a 5.5 acre development with 300 some apartments, we treat them all the same. And so it can be frustrating for a developer or a small scale developer trying to get a 10 unit townhome unit through, and they have to go through two stages of multiple planning commission architectural board reviews before finally getting to council for the rezoning. So is it something that we could look at breaking or delineating a major and a minor? A lot of communities have this. One's an overlay, one's a base district. Actually, you change the zoning of the base district for the larger projects that need that, and to reflect it for the long-term kind of health of the community. But a smaller project, 10,000 square feet and under or something, could be an overlay where you retain the base zoning, but it provides a process for modifications and some variances to be allowed. And so this is something that we're still wrestling with, and we'll continue to develop. And so, council's role in both of these is something that we're fleshing out as well. Is typically an overlay goes to planning commission, and then a rezoning goes to council. But those are things that we're talking about. One of I think the positives that came out of the downtown development of the last year is that a lot of the folks really liked the joint PC-ABR meetings. And so that is something that we may look at building into our code, as that's required as part of a PD. It avoids redundancy. It is an efficiency that can be built in and required. And so that's something that we got positive feedback on. This adaptive reuse is pretty straightforward. There's communities that have these. We're just looking to bring it in. And so it should incentivize, saving older structures and really trying to get more flexible, either residential or commercial uses out of old structures. So what would those uses be that you would look at in the different districts, potentially allowing as the things that we're looking at. Hotels is another one that's in there. Accessory uses, these are things that are kind of buried in the code right now, but it talks about like ADUs, solar panels, lots of different things. Are they like solar panels? Not in our code right now. And so, should those things be permitted in all districts? Should there be standards with them? Yes. I think that's something that we're working through. Drive-throughs is another huge thing in this. As you kind of work through, ADUs is one of those, and that is the fight is, should you allow ADUs, especially detached ADUs, more versus more regulations? That's a balance that you have to kind of hit that. And then drive-throughs. I think the general direction, at least that we pulled from the ZPAC, and hopefully I got this right, is that the high stacking uses, predominantly your fast food restaurants, we may want to look at trying to limit those to just the C3, that general commercial districts that generally has larger lot sizes and is kind of out of the central area of the city, but still permitting those low stacking uses like banks. There's a couple others in there that are kind of that.
Pharmacy.
Yeah, pharmacies, like things that might be more appropriate for C2 and the areas that are closer to the residential areas of the city. But this is it's another topic that we're still working through. Solar energy, they gave a lot of different examples, but I think the thing that we talked about is I think most people don't want those in the front yards. It's still an aesthetic piece. An aesthetic piece has to be worked through. And I think we got a comment back because they used like a carport example. It's not something that we would allow in the residential, I don't think, but it might be something to consider in the commercial district of kind of those solar car like parking covers. I think that's generally it. We are talking through, so we have started the development and sign standards. So now we're talking and really pulling in kind of updates on residential and commercial guidelines, kind of our design review process for ABR, the fence standards, landscaping standards, like all of those, the subdivision standards of lot splits and consolidations. And so while we're still kind of working on district and use standards, the House Hill Levine is starting to move on to task 5. And so that will probably be the next topic that I'll come back to talk about. So.
Thank you, and this is a little off subject, but I know the moratorium on smoke shops is set to expire at the end of the year, and it was kind of in line with this process, so are we expecting an extension of that moratorium, or?
I think that we would like to extend that because we are building that consideration for those into the commercial use table. And so we're looking at, I think it was Akron that just passed. There's a couple other municipal examples that we have that they treat them very similar. The code that Akron just passed treats it very similar to our, like the tattoo shops, where there's distance regulations from certain VR municipal zoning of schools, parks, those types of things, and so that might be the direction that we look at, mirroring.
Great. Well, happy to work with you on the moratorium extension to get the time we need to properly figure these things out. Any other questions from? Thank you, Tom.
By the way, I noticed how bright and cartoon-like and Vegas-like most of the vape shops are, many of the vape shops are. I mean, it looks like a slot machine, for heaven's sakes. And I just had a dad tell me that modern vape shops are Joe the Camel revisited, where targeting kids, clouds of cotton candy smoke, and it's more addictive than conventional tobacco. So we've got a health code to go after some of those shops. I don't even see an employee in half of them. Maybe there's somebody lurking at the back, but it's basically a overblown kiosk for selling addictive stuff. I'm glad we have a moratorium, but maybe we should have more than a moratorium. But at any rate, question on the, first of all, this is great. Appreciate the regular check-ins. And unless you're, actually, Councilman Evans was an ABR member. Councilman Baker was a Planning Commission member. So we have an uncommonly informed city council right now. But unless you're in the profession, it's hard for some of us to learn it. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that. So enhancing density in a manner that is consistent more or less with a community's 100-year history is, I think, a good marker or a goal and a parameter to guide that goal. Now, will density accomplish housing price relief? And when I say that statement, I also ask, am I a prisoner of the moment? Because to be direct, I'm door knocking a lot of doors these days, and a lot of steps and porches, and not all the porches in Lakewood are fixed up. I'll shock Chris Parmalee. And not all of the clutter is cleaned up. And there's still a lot of deferred maintenance to be addressed, even though our paper valuation says your property is now worth 50 or 67 or 100% more than it used to be. So I always think that property value increase at least gives you a fighting chance to go to your bank and have equity that then could be used to reinvest in your property and update it and all that kind of stuff. So it's not all bad. And it is true that people are really feeling the squeeze. So, and I'm not talking about affordable housing, which is a term of art. I'm talking about just the high price of housing is having all kinds of ripple effect on people, their ability to move in or move back, or have their college student who's now in the workforce find a home here, all that stuff. So I am interested in trying to get more density and bring some price relief to the current housing market, as difficult as that is. Although this tool is supposed to be a decades-long tool. So I actually welcome the feedback. Is that comment on my part, am I being too short-term in my thinking? Part one. And part two, will that even accomplish it? Because accessory dwelling units, as Chris Parmalee was just saying, is they're not cheap. So what they add is valuable to our properties, but it may not add low rent housing units. It adds something else, right?
Well, it depends on the structure, I would say, but I think the most expensive thing to ask somebody to do for an ADU is to ask them to build a detached one outside their home. I think the lowest cost and most feasible option for probably most Lakewood homeowners would be that they have a home that has that third floor in it, but they're currently not allowed to convert that or recognize it as a dwelling unit, even though it is. And so it's kind of a hidden asset that they have to keep hidden until they are given relief through zoning law change to say that it is a three-family home, and it can have a bathroom, cooking unit, and a separate entrance.
So that might be the source of less expensive.
It's already there.
Yeah, I think I would say that, in the short time that we've had ADU code out there, Councilman, the majority, if not all, of the people who have called and asked about applying for an ADU have been people in the R2 with a two-family home that have a third floor unit that they thought was a third floor unit, but it's not. And the way
You're not allowed to rent it.
the way that but unfortunately the way that our code and even that ADU amendment was written is that the only people eligible for an ADU would be a single-family home and an R2, because you would still be, by adding that dwelling unit, you would still be within that two dwelling unit cap.
So my feedback to my colleagues would be, I think we were cautious and for good reasons in that initial proposal of allowed accessory dwelling units. And I think it's fair to say that our experience shows that we should broaden the parameters and make it more permissive so that we can see if we can get some more people applying and making use. But then, okay, last question is, am I thinking about this correctly, is most of our strategic growth potential on the residential side? You did have some commercial, I don't know if we're going to get to industrial, but because Lakewood's built out, can we think of our growth strategy for our community, however we define that, I'm begging some questions, to also incorporate the commercial properties? I guess that's already happening at the Barry Buick site and the Spitzer site and the former Lakewood Hospital. So there's that. Those are the very large commercial scale. But you see the question I'm driving at? And I mean, there could just be an employer. Like, do we attract an employer here, and if we did, how realistic is that thinking? And I think the traditional economic development attraction thinking of the last 40 years is not Lakewood. You got to have a bunch of greenfield, undeveloped land, or at least less density than we do. So I don't know if we can challenge ourselves to find new opportunities in the next 20, 25 years in that regard. I'd be.
Unless you're going to come up with a zoning proposal that creates more land into Lake Erie, I don't like. I think it's just it's hard, and I think the flexibility, and it's the nature of the community. And what seems to happen is we seem to be an incubator for companies, and then they need more space and they leave, and we could. But I don't know how you could keep the character of Lakewood, but create opportunities for a 500 employee operation to exist here, short of them buying one of the existing towers and getting all the tenants out, and
or one of the industrial areas.
Industrial, and that's where the adaptive reuse overlay would work in the industrial areas, and it would allow potentially for hotel use and some really interesting commercial uses. So I think that's a big. Now it's kind of at the end because we was trying to get a lot in there, but there are a lot of creative things we can do in the industrial use area with the overlay.
I think one of the things I really, having seen enough of these zoning codes in my life, is that this really does, it's proactive and giving us ways to be creative about how we use all of our spaces. I mean, it's upfront, it's getting us into, conformity with a lot of things, but it's also giving us the means to change with the times as we go along here. And so we're not going to be prohibitive for a lot of things.
So we're kind of the community of small business innovation, and that includes small cottage industry landlords.
Yeah, I think a part of that, I think the adaptive reuse is probably the biggest tool that we're putting into that. And then to the chair's point, I think our most underused district is probably our industrial district. It is a antiquated old area that the most modern facility that's there is our recycling center and the new animal shelter.
But it's right next to a lot of transit.
It is.
And it's 90's not far. So there are opportunities, I think, there. And I think, no offense to self-storage, but I prefer that stay in Lorain County and out in the hinterlands, and in Lakewood we have more productive uses on our lands.
Screw Factory is a good example of that, like an adaptive reuse of a building that we had to jump through a couple hoops, but you got something like the climbing gym was able to find a new home when they got moved out of the Baptist church. And that it's just allowing that kind of that appropriate mix of commercial uses that an indoor rec use like a gym that begots a new coffee shop and like an ice cream shop or whatever we've had discussions with that supports the artists in the building, and like it's
by the way, while we're at it, I really would love to see what I call the walking entrance to Madison Park, which is the basketball court area. If we could mirror what the Screw Factory is doing on the public side and invite them to have some kind of on their lawn exterior use, which I know some of the building managers were they were aspiring to, like a cafe or something. I think that would be a pretty fantastic evolution of what's going on there, because you're 100% right. There's all kinds of, it's a microcosm of a lot happening in that old building.
Love to see that in a lot of other those underused industrial buildings.
Thank you, Assistant Director Boss, and I want to be mindful of time. We're already a little bit over, and we got a couple more agenda items that we can go through. So without any more questions on that, I will commit to this committee and to my colleagues that each time ZPAC gets an update from the consultant, that I work with Assistant Director Boss to bring it here so we see it, because the intention is ultimately a giant batch of ordinances that will change our zoning code, and I don't want us to be surprised. So I want there to be a good record of all the things we've considered and have it be an iterative process, and I thank the planning department and the consultant for helping us through that. So this time I'll go ahead and make a motion to receive and file that communication. Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. And then the next thing, I'll keep it on the docket, but substitute ordinance 18/2025 about the amending the high grass and weeds ordinances to allow for natural managed landscapes. We're mindful of the fact that the building department, wants guidance here. They would like to start implementing whatever we come up with for the next growing season, which means you want to educate the public in advance of that. So we will seek to obtain insight from Keep Lakewood Beautiful. So Councilman Bullock has reached out to them to kind of more formal, their formal input to this ordinance, so that we as a committee can review what they have recommended and work with the building department and the law department to come up with something that works for everyone, with the intention by the end of this year to have something passed. And then perhaps Keep Lakewood Beautiful could also be a communications tool for to assist the planning department or the housing and building department in some of the education associated with the new regime and what we're going to be allowing. Anything else to add on that? No? So I'll just go ahead and keep that on the docket. The next one is the communication from Planning Director Byington about property of 1472 Bell. Familiar with the property, but is there anything, I guess if the planning department wants to speak on the ordinance. And I know there's some issue with technically, so I'd like to understand timing of the planning department as to whether this is something they'd like to see passed at the first meeting of November, in which case we may have to suspend the rules simply because it wasn't on the docket the last time, but I think the public's aware of it, so we could talk to the council president about what that looks like if the planning department has urgency with it. So just curious as to kind of where it's at.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as far as time frame, just to start off with, there isn't truly a real rush to get it passed. We could go through the normal procedure. It's ready to be marketed. We would like to proceed with putting out an RFP to get a realtor on board to market it for us. But we could wait if council determines they want to go through the regular process with the readings. And then just a little background, you have my communication in front of you, which I already read into the record at council, just where we are asking permission to enter into an agreement with a licensed real estate broker to market for sale the property for 180 days. And then you also have the project summary, but for the purpose of the anybody that, for the public, this project specifically addresses action step number 4 of Lakewood's affordable housing strategy, creating home ownership opportunities for low, moderate income households, and it also aligns with the community vision housing goals by preserving Lakewood's aging housing stock and enhancing the quality and character of the city's residential neighborhoods. The funding source were home dollars, total amount being $437,000. This property has to be sold to a low, moderate income household earning less than 80% of the area median income since home dollars were used. HUD also sets the limit for the max that we can sell the property for. So the maximum that it could be sold for is $209,000. And a couple design elements for the public is that it's a 1,700 square foot fully insulated, weatherproofed home with a restored historic facade. There's 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a 2-car detached garage, brand new high efficiency furnace, central air conditioning, all new appliances, including a washer and dryer, and all new windows. The original we refinished the hardwood floors throughout, and I would welcome any council member that wants to take a tour. We can get you in there. I went through it. It's very nice. I think it would be really great for a family to be able to get into this property as soon as possible.
So for this committee's sake, for process, I'm in favor of reporting this out this evening, and then the council president can determine what we want to do on the floor in November. Is there any questions? The one thing I would like, if I asked the clerk to pull up the last time we authorized the administration to sell property, and I do like, there to be some timeline in there for the administration to report back on, like if it's sold, it says you'll report back in a timely manner, or you'll give us details of the sale. I would like to amend and interested in the administration's, if this is too restrictive or kind of how they feel about within 45 days of sale, where there'll be some docket communication. Is that appropriate?
Through you, I believe that's what we did on the vacant lots just recently. So, yeah, I believe it was after sale. I think it was 30 or 45 days. I don't see any issue with that at all.
Okay, then I will make a motion to amend this ordinance, ordinance 28, 2025, to include, to amend section 3 at the end of section 3, after a report to council the details of the sale within 45 days of the closing on the property.
So moved. Or second.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
I guess, yeah, yeah, you moved, I seconded, okay. So the next thing then would be, I will make a motion to recommend full council approval of the amended ordinance to full council. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any discussion?
As amended.
As amended, yeah, as a substitute, or amended ordinance is what I called it, I think. All those in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes, so it'll be on the council docket next week.
If there's a chance to take a tour of the building, I'd love to. After next Tuesday.
And I think that is all that we have on the agenda, so I want to thank everyone for, you know, the extra 15 minutes. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. This committee stands adjourned. Thank you.